Jake Cooper's transport ship screamed through the atmosphere, warning lights flashing red across every panel. The engines were dying, fuel lines ruptured, and his navigation system showed nothing but static. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a respected military engineer working on humanity's outer colonies. Now he was a fugitive, branded a traitor by the very corporation he'd tried to expose. They'd framed him perfectly. Documents he'd never seen, transactions he'd never made, all pointing to him selling classified defense plans to rival factions. His protests meant nothing. His evidence disappeared overnight. The execution order came within 48 hours. So Jake ran. He'd stolen this beat-up transport from a scrapyard on the edge of human space, hoping to disappear into the frontier. But the ship had other plans. One by one, its systems failed, and now he was falling toward an uncharted planet that barely registered on his dying scanners. The only notation in the database read, Kepler 442, archaeological interest, abandoned structures, no strategic value. The ship hit hard. Metal shrieked and buckled as it skipped across crystalline rock like a stone on water. Jake gripped the controls, fighting to keep the nose up, but physics won. The transport plowed into the ground, carving a trench before finally shuddering to a stop. For a long moment, Jake just sat there, hands shaking, breathing hard. Alive. Against all odds, he was still alive. He checked the readouts. Life support was functional. The air outside was breathable. The ship itself? Dead. Every system except basic power was fried beyond repair. He wasn't going anywhere. Jake grabbed his emergency pack, what little food and water he had left, and popped the hatch. The air that rushed in was cool and crisp, carrying a strange metallic scent. He stepped out onto the planet's surface and froze. Rising from a canyon about half a mile away was something impossible. A fortress. But calling it that felt inadequate. It was massive, easily the size of a small city, built from materials that seemed to shimmer between solid and liquid. The walls were covered in veins of some kind of energy that pulsed with faint blue light, like a heartbeat frozen in stone. The architecture made no sense. Angles that shouldn't connect did. Towers that looked like they'd topple stood perfectly balanced. Nothing in humanity's databases showed buildings like this, and Jake had studied every known alien species during his military service. He approached cautiously, his engineer's mind racing. The structure had to be ancient, predating even the oldest civilizations humanity had encountered. Yet it looked pristine, untouched by time. The entrance stood open. No doors, no barriers, just a dark archway leading inside. Jake hesitated. Every survival instinct told him to stay away. But where else could he go? His ship was dead. The planet was barren. This fortress was his only option for shelter. He stepped inside. The interior defied expectations. Instead of ruins and decay, he found corridors that looked like they'd been abandoned yesterday. The floors were smooth, unmarked. The walls held strange symbols that glowed faintly when he passed. His translator device tried to make sense of them but came up with nothing but errors. Jake found a large chamber near the entrance and decided to make camp. He unpacked his bedroll, set up his small heating unit, and tried to process what he'd found. As an engineer, he'd always believed in logical explanations. But this place challenged everything he knew. As night fell, something strange happened. The fortress came alive with soft light, illuminating the corridors in gentle blue. Jake felt different too. The exhaustion from the crash should have knocked him out, but instead he felt energized. His thoughts seemed clearer, sharper. Even his old shoulder injury from a colony accident years ago had stopped aching. He tried to sleep but couldn't shake the feeling that the fortress was watching him. Not threatening, just aware. Around midnight, Jake decided to explore deeper. He followed a main corridor that seemed to stretch forever, passing chambers filled with equipment he couldn't identify. Some rooms looked like laboratories. Others resembled command centers. All of it abandoned yet somehow still functional. Then he entered a hallway lined with strange alcoves and everything changed. Panels slid open in the walls. Automated turrets emerged, sleek and deadly, their barrels tracking his movement with mechanical precision. Red targeting lasers painted his chest. Jake raised his hands slowly. Easy. I'm not a threat. The turrets didn't fire. Instead, they emitted scanning beams, blue light washing over him from head to toe. He stood frozen, waiting for the end. The scan completed. The turrets hummed, processing. Then one by one they retracted back into the walls. The panels closed. The corridor returned to peaceful silence. Jake stood there, heart pounding. Those defenses had scanned him and decided not to shoot. They'd recognized something. But what? He was just a human, a nobody, a fugitive with nothing special about him. He looked down at his hands, then back at the corridor ahead. Whatever this fortress was, it had let him in. It had accepted him. And that terrified him more than any weapon could. For 3 days Jake explored the fortress. Each corridor led to new mysteries. Rooms filled with devices he couldn't begin to understand. Chambers that seemed to respond to his presence, lighting up when he entered and dimming when he left. The place was like a living thing, ancient but somehow aware. He'd found storage areas with containers of perfectly preserved food that his scanner said was safe to eat. Water flowed from taps that activated at his touch. The fortress was taking care of him, keeping him alive. It was unsettling and comforting at the same time. His sleep had been strange too. Dreams filled with symbols and sounds that made no sense, yet felt important. He'd wake up with his head buzzing with half-formed thoughts, like his brain was trying to learn a language it had never heard before. On the 4th morning Jake found the door. It was different from all the others, massive and covered in intricate patterns that seemed to move when he stared at them too long. When he approached, the door simply melted away, revealing a corridor that descended deep into the fortress's core. His instincts told him this was important. This was what the fortress had been guiding him toward. The corridor opened into a chamber so vast it took his breath away. The ceiling disappeared into darkness far above. The walls curved outward in a perfect circle, and floating throughout the space were thousands of crystalline spheres. Each one was about the size of his head, hovering without any visible support, glowing with soft internal light. They hung there like frozen stars, creating constellations in the air. Jake stepped forward slowly, his footsteps echoing in the enormous space. The spheres pulsed gently, their light shifting in rhythm like they were breathing. He'd never seen anything so beautiful and alien at the same time. One sphere drifted closer to him as if curious. Jake watched it approach, stopping just within arm's reach. Without thinking, he reached out and touched its smooth surface. The sphere exploded with brilliant white light. Jake tried to pull his hand back but couldn't. The light poured into him, through his eyes, his ears, directly into his mind. He gasped as a voice filled his head, speaking in sounds that shouldn't make sense but somehow did. It was like hearing music and understanding the lyrics without knowing the language. Human. Recognized. Initiating. Archive protocol. The words were fragmented, broken, as if the voice was remembering how to speak after an impossibly long silence. But even as Jake listened, the voice changed, smoothed out, learned from the way his brain processed information. Images flooded his mind. He saw worlds being born, civilizations rising and falling, stars dying and new ones igniting. He watched as a species he'd never seen before built wonders across galaxies. They were tall and graceful, their bodies seeming to shift between solid and energy. The architects, the voice called them. They'd existed millions of years ago, long before humanity had even crawled out of its oceans. They'd seeded life on countless worlds, guided young species, built structures that defied physics itself. And then, for reasons the archive didn't explain, they'd simply vanished. Gone without a trace, leaving behind only these fortresses. What is this place? Jake whispered, his voice sounding tiny in the vast chamber. One of 7 archive fortresses. Repositories of knowledge. Testing grounds. Each contains the synthesis protocol. The what? The sphere showed him. Images of matter reshaping itself at a thought. Technology responding to pure will. A being existing in multiple places at once, moving through space without ships, manipulating reality at its most fundamental level. Power beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. The bridge between thought and matter, the voice explained. The architects created it as their final achievement. They waited for a species capable of wielding it properly. Your kind possesses the necessary stubbornness. Jake laughed, the sound sharp and slightly hysterical. Stubbornness? That's your big requirement. You think in contradictions. You hold opposing thoughts simultaneously. You hope when logic demands despair. You create when destruction is simpler. You adapt when others break. This is required for synthesis. The archive showed him other species that had found the fortresses over the millennia. 17 different civilizations. Each one had attempted the synthesis protocol. Jake watched as their minds shattered under the strain, unable to handle the contradiction of being both physical and quantum, both individual and unlimited. Their thought patterns were too rigid, too logical. They couldn't bend without breaking. But humans can? Jake asked, still struggling to believe it. Humanity endures what others cannot. You are chaos and order. Emotional and rational. You should not work, yet you do. This is your strength. Jake's mind reeled. He was just an engineer. A fugitive. Nothing special. Yet this ancient artificial intelligence was telling him that his entire species was unique in the galaxy. Before he could process it all, the sphere pulsed red. A warning. Alert. Multiple vessels detected approaching planetary system. 40 standard hours until arrival. Energy signatures match human corporate fleet and Skrull scavenger swarm. Jake's blood went cold. They'd found him. The corporations that had destroyed his life had tracked the fortress's awakening. And the Skrull were worse, an insectoid species known for stripping ancient sites bare, destroying anything they couldn't understand or sell. They'll tear this place apart, Jake said. They'll weaponize whatever they find. Affirmative. The synthesis protocol cannot fall into unprepared hands. You must choose. The sphere projected two paths before him. In one he fled, found a way off this planet, kept running. The fortress would be lost, its knowledge destroyed or corrupted. In the other path, he saw himself stepping into a chamber deeper in the fortress. Saw himself transformed into something more than human. Powerful enough to protect this place. But the images showed pain, showed the risk of losing himself completely in the process. Choose, the voice said, neither encouraging nor discouraging. Ascend or flee. The synthesis will transform you or destroy you. There is no middle path. 40 hours remain. Jake stood in the chamber of floating stars, his hand still touching the sphere, and realized his decision would change everything. Not just for him but possibly for all of humanity. The fortress waited. The fleet approached. And time was running out. Jake stood at the entrance of the synthesis chamber, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it echoing in his ears. The chamber itself was like something out of a fever dream. A circular platform sat in the center, maybe 10 feet across, surrounded by pillars of crackling energy that sparked and hissed. The air itself felt charged, making his skin tingle. Through his connection to the fortress AI, he could now see things he shouldn't be able to see. The sensors showed him the incoming fleet in perfect detail, even though they were still days away. Corporate warships, sleek and deadly, bristling with weapons. And mixed in with them were crawler vessels, organic-looking ships covered in what looked like insect carapaces. The crawlers were scavengers, known throughout the galaxy for ripping apart ancient sites and selling whatever they found to the highest bidder. They were coming for the fortress, coming for its secrets, and they'd kill anyone who got in their way. How long does it take? Jake asked, his voice steadier than he felt. 12 hours of agony, the AI responded, its tone matter-of-fact. Most candidates lose consciousness within the first hour and never wake. Your neural structure will be rewritten at the quantum level. Your body will be reconstructed molecule by molecule. The pain is beyond what your species has words for. Jake swallowed hard. And if I survive? You will be the first new architect in 3 million years. The fortress will be yours to command. But understand, Jake Cooper, you may not survive as yourself. The person who emerges may retain your memories but lose your humanity. Jake thought about his old life. About Ryan Webb, his former partner who'd looked him in the eye and lied to investigators, sealing Jake's fate. About Director Hayes, who'd signed the execution order without a second thought. About all the corporate board members who'd called him a traitor when all he'd done was expose their plan to wipe out an entire colony world for profit. They'd taken everything from him. His career, his reputation, his future. They'd turned his name into poison. But standing here, in this ancient fortress with power beyond imagination at his fingertips, Jake realized something. He wasn't doing this for revenge. He was doing this because someone had to. Because if the corporations got this technology, they'd use it to tighten their grip on humanity even further. And if the crawlers got it, they'd sell it to the highest bidder, consequences be damned. Jake stepped onto the platform. The change was instant. Energy erupted from the pillars, wrapping around him like chains. He tried to scream but his throat locked up. Something invisible flooded into his body through every pore, through his eyes, his nose, his mouth. Nanomachines, billions of them, smaller than cells, invading every part of him. The pain hit like a sledgehammer. Every nerve in his body fired at once. His bones felt like they were being dissolved and rebuilt. His muscles tore and rewove themselves. His brain felt like it was being pulled apart and reassembled in a different configuration. Jake collapsed to his knees, his vision going white, then black, then showing him colors that didn't exist. His consciousness began to expand outward, beyond his body. Suddenly he could feel the fortress around him not as a building but as an extension of himself. The power conduits were his veins. The defensive weapons were his arms. The sensors were his eyes. He screamed and the sound that came out wasn't human. It was a frequency that shattered the air itself, resonating through the fortress walls. Time lost all meaning. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like seconds. His mind touched something impossible. Quantum states where he existed in multiple places at once. He could see himself on the platform and in the corridor outside and in the archive chamber all simultaneously. Past and future weren't fixed points anymore but directions he could look, like turning his head. In that expanded state, Jake understood why the other species had failed. They tried to control the chaos, to impose their rigid logic on something that defied logic. Their minds had shattered like glass under pressure. But humans, stubborn and adaptable humans, didn't try to control chaos. They learned to ride it. Like surfing a wave, like flying through a storm, like every impossible thing humanity had ever done simply because someone told them it couldn't be done. Jake stopped fighting the transformation. He let it flow through him, reshape him, remake him. And slowly, agonizingly, the pieces came back together. When he finally opened his eyes, everything had changed. He could see individual atoms floating in the air, each one vibrating with energy. He could feel the gravitational pull of the planet's core beneath him. He could sense the approaching fleet light years away, counting their ships, reading their energy signatures. His body was still human in shape, still recognizable. But when he held up his hand and focused, the skin rippled. The cells shifted, adapted, changed at his will. He could make himself denser than steel or lighter than air. He could phase through solid matter or become solid enough to punch through a battleship's hull. Jake stood up, feeling steadier than he'd ever felt in his life. He raised his hand toward the chamber wall. Without touching it, he reshaped the metal, making it flow like water, forming new patterns just by thinking about it. The AI's voice filled the chamber, and for the first time, it carried emotion. Respect, maybe even awe. Synthesis complete. The fortress recognizes its new architect. Welcome, Jake Cooper. Jake smiled, and throughout the fortress, lights pulsed in response. The entire structure seemed to smile with him, recognizing its new master. The fleet would arrive in 6 hours. Let them come. He was ready. The battlecruiser Retribution tore through hyperspace and emerged above Kepler 442 like a beast smelling blood. It was massive, bristling with enough weapons to level a city. Behind it came 14 more warships, each one carrying the corporate logo of the hegemony. And mixed throughout the formation were the crawler vessels, organic-looking ships that moved like insects, covered in chitinous armor and pulsing with bioluminescence. On the bridge of the Retribution, Commander Victoria Cross stood with her hands behind her back, staring at the fortress on the main view screen. She'd been hunting Jake Cooper for 3 weeks. The man had embarrassing evidence of her operations, evidence that could destroy her career and land her in prison for life. She'd personally signed off on the orders to eliminate an entire mining colony that had refused corporate control. Jake had found the records. Now she'd kill him and claim the ancient fortress for the hegemony. 2 problems solved at once. Open a channel to the surface, she commanded, her voice cold. The communications officer nodded. Channel open, Commander. Victoria's voice boomed across every frequency, echoing through space. Jake Cooper, this is Commander Cross of the Hegemony Enforcement Fleet. Surrender the Architect facility immediately and you'll receive a fair trial. Resist and we will reduce the entire site to molten slag. You have 5 minutes to respond. She waited, a thin smile on her lips. There was no response. No plea for mercy. No desperate bargaining. Then everything went wrong at once. Every ship in the fleet suddenly lost weapons lock. Targeting computers went haywire, showing impossible readings. The fortress appeared in 17 different locations simultaneously. Alarms blared across every bridge. What's happening? Victoria demanded. Before anyone could answer, 3 of her cruisers simply stopped firing. Their engines still worked, their shields still held, but their weapons had gone dead. Engineering reports flooded in, all saying the same impossible thing. The weapons had been molecularly fused. The metal of the cannons had somehow bonded with itself at the atomic level, turning them into useless sculptures. Then Jake's voice filled every cockpit, every bridge, every helmet in the entire fleet. You should have stayed away, Victoria. He appeared in space itself. No ship around him. No spacesuit. Just a man floating in the vacuum, surrounded by rippling energy that made the stars behind him bend and distort. His body glowed with power that sensors couldn't properly measure. The Crawler Queen, a massive insectoid creature commanding the scavenger swarm, screeched orders in her clicking language. 1,000 small fighters detached from the motherships and swarmed toward Jake like angry wasps. Jake didn't even move. He simply phased out of existence, becoming translucent like smoke. The fighters passed right through him, their weapons firing uselessly into empty space. Then he solidified behind their formation, clasped his hands together, and released a pulse of gravitational energy. The wave hit the fighters like an invisible wall. They spun out of control, tumbling away from the planet in every direction, their pilots screaming as G-forces crushed them into their seats. "He's one person." Victoria screamed at her tactical officer. "All ships, concentrate fire. Everything we have. Now." The fleet opened up. Energy beams, missiles, railgun rounds, plasma torpedoes, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust, all converged on the single floating figure. Jake stood at the center of the storm and simply raised his hands. The energy didn't hit him. It couldn't. He bent it around himself, refracted it through quantum fields that existed half in normal space and half somewhere else. The deadly barrage scattered harmlessly into the void, dissipating like fireworks. The Crawler Queen, enraged and desperate, deployed her ultimate weapon. A massive spike-shaped device detached from the mothership, its surface covered in writhing tentacles and pulsing with sickly green light. It was a planet killer designed to burrow to a world's core and detonate, cracking it apart from the inside. The weapon launched, accelerating toward the planet's surface. Jake watched it streak past him. Then he did something that made every scientist watching lose their minds. He existed in two places at once. His body remained floating in space near the fortress, clearly visible to every sensor. But he also appeared at the weapon's location, hundreds of miles away. Both versions of him were real, both were solid, both were Jake. The second Jake reached into the planet killer's systems, not with his hands but with his mind, manipulating the quantum states of its circuitry. He rewired its targeting protocols in seconds, overriding systems that should have been impossible to hack. The weapon turned gracefully, like a dancer changing direction mid-leap. It streaked away from the planet and accelerated toward the crawler mothership instead. The Queen had just enough time to realize what was happening. Her screech of rage turned into one of terror as the planet killer crashed into her flagship's hull and detonated. The explosion lit up space like a newborn star. When the light faded, the mothership was simply gone. Vaporized. The remaining crawler vessels broke formation immediately, fleeing in panic. The corporate warships hesitated. Victoria stared at her view screen in horror as Jake's image appeared directly in front of her, as if he were standing on her bridge. "Tell them what you saw here," Jake said quietly, his voice calm despite what he'd just done. "Tell them humanity doesn't need their empires anymore. Tell them we're done being controlled." Victoria couldn't speak. Couldn't move. She'd seen plenty of combat in her career, but nothing like this. One man had just defeated an entire battle fleet without breaking a sweat. "Go," Jake said. "And don't come back." The Retribution's jump drive activated without anyone touching the controls. The ship lurched into hyperspace, dragging the rest of the corporate fleet with it. Within seconds, the space around the planet was empty except for debris. Jake let out a long breath and returned to the fortress, materializing on its walls. The transformation had left him exhausted in ways he'd never felt before. Maintaining his consciousness across quantum states, manipulating matter at the atomic level, bending gravity itself, it had taken everything he had. But he'd won. The fortress was safe. And more importantly, he'd sent a message that would echo across the galaxy. The power was his to command, yes. But it was the human mind wielding that power that made him truly unstoppable. Aliens thought in rigid patterns, in logical progressions. Humans thought in improvisation, in creative chaos, in doing the impossible simply because someone said it couldn't be done. That was the real weapon. That was what the architects had recognized in humanity. And that was why Jake Cooper, a disgraced engineer turned something more, would never be defeated. 6 months had passed since the battle. The fortress had transformed from a silent tomb into something alive. Voices echoed through corridors that had been empty for millions of years. Children laughed in chambers where ancient machines once hummed. The smell of cooking food drifted from what had been a sterile archive room, now converted into a community kitchen. Jake stood at the main entrance, hands in his pockets, watching the fifth transport of the day make its descent. The ship was old and battered, held together with spare parts and hope. It kicked up dust as it settled on the landing pad that Jake had created by reshaping the fortress's outer walls. He could do things like that now, mold matter with a thought, though he tried not to do it in front of people. It made them uncomfortable. The transport's ramp lowered and a family emerged. Parents, 3 kids, and what looked like everything they owned packed into a few bags. The father spotted Jake and waved uncertainly. Jake waved back, then sent a mental signal to the Fortress AI. Within seconds, a guide drone appeared to show them to their quarters. They came from everywhere. Refugees fleeing corporate wars where colonies had become battlegrounds. Scientists blacklisted for refusing to weaponize their research. Families who just wanted their kids to grow up somewhere they could breathe clean air and drink water that wasn't rationed. They'd heard the broadcasts about New Architect, as people were calling it, a place where humans could start over. Rachel, a terraforming engineer, had shown up a month ago with nothing but her tools and a determination to make the surrounding wasteland bloom. She'd already started planting gardens in the crystalline soil, using techniques the Architect database had taught her. David arrived shortly after with medical supplies and decades of experience stitching people back together. He'd set up a clinic in one of the fortress's side chambers, treating everything from broken bones to the malnutrition that plagued so many refugees. Beth taught the children. 20 kids now, ranging from 6 to 16, learning in a room filled with holographic displays that showed them the galaxy in ways no human school ever could. Jake sometimes watched from the doorway, listening to her explain orbital mechanics or alien biology with an enthusiasm that reminded him why he was doing this. Ryan, Jake's former partner who'd betrayed him, felt like he'd existed in another lifetime. These people were different. Better. They'd lost things too, been betrayed too, but they'd chosen to build rather than destroy. Jake had made his choice in those first days after the battle. The Fortress AI had shown him the locations of 6 other Architect facilities scattered across the galaxy, each one waiting for a human to unlock them. He could have traveled to each one, created more synthesis-enhanced humans like himself. An army of godlike beings who could reshape reality. But that wasn't what humanity needed. More power wouldn't solve humanity's problems. It would just make the powerful more dangerous. Instead, Jake had done something the Architects probably never imagined. He'd started broadcasting their knowledge across every communication channel in the galaxy. Not the synthesis protocol itself, which was too dangerous in the wrong hands, but everything else. Medical technologies that could cure diseases that had plagued species for millennia. Clean energy designs that could power worlds without poisoning them. Agricultural methods that could turn barren rocks into farmland. He gave it all away. Free. Unrestricted. To every species, every faction, every world that wanted it. The response had been chaotic. Some alien species hailed him as a hero, a visionary who'd elevated the entire galaxy. Others called him a threat, a human with too much power who needed to be eliminated before he decided to use it. Most just didn't know what to make of a being who'd gained ultimate power and then chose to give most of it away. Rachel found him at sunset, watching the twin suns paint the crystalline canyon in shades of gold and crimson. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, appreciating the view. "You okay?" she finally asked. "Still human," Jake said. It was something he told himself every day. Despite the power, despite the transformation, he was still Jake Cooper. Still the engineer who tried to do the right thing and paid the price. That's what matters. The council voted this morning. They want to officially name you governor of the colony. Jake shook his head. "I'm not a politician." Rachel smiled. "No, you're not. You're something better. You're someone who had every reason to be angry, to be bitter, to use that power for revenge. But you chose hope instead. That's why they trust you." Jake felt the fortress around him, its vast systems responding to his thoughts like extensions of his own body. He could reshape continents if he wanted. Destroy fleets. Bend space and time. The power was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. But none of it mattered as much as the sound of children playing in the courtyards below. Or watching Rachel's gardens grow where nothing should have grown. Or seeing David save a sick child's life with medicine that hadn't existed 6 months ago. The Architects had wanted humanity to inherit their power, to become the new guardians of the galaxy. Jake had different ideas. He'd make sure humanity inherited something better, their own future built with their own hands on their own terms. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Jake allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy was learning what humans had always known. Real strength wasn't about being invincible. It was about getting knocked down and standing back up. Again and again, no matter how many times it took. And humanity never stayed down for long.